If there's one book that is on everybody's must-read books list, it is C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. Now let me tell you why.
C.S. Lewis argued that there was a universally understood morality that he called the Tao. We all know it's wrong to kick old ladies in the shins for pleasure.
These are the words that C.S. Lewis put in the mouth of the devil in 1939.
I never would have been a lawyer, nor would I have become an effective debater if it weren't for C.S. Lewis.
So Lewis's formula was engage the imagination.
C.S. Lewis was so effective as an evangelist. He came at Christianity primarily as a literary figure rather than as a philosophical figure.
C.S. Lewis is someone I reference in relation to this because I think he was a masterful at both doing the kind of the traditional classical apologetics, but I think he probably brought more people into an awareness and into an approach to the Christian faith actually through his fantasy fiction.
And I will be candid, C.S. Lewis is my favorite author of all time.
If C.S. Lewis is right in his classic book, The Great Divorce, God doesn't send people to hell, people choose it.
C.S. Lewis has had far more impact for the kingdom of God since his death than he ever did during his life.
Or as C.S. Lewis puts it, I love C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis.
C.S. Lewis, the most reluctant.
C.S. Lewis.
Lord Jesus, I pray that what I say will be spoken clearly about C.S. Lewis. I know, Lord, that Lewis would not want to be glorified here this afternoon.
You'd be surprised at how much street cred you can get by changing one letter in the beginning of your name. I'm constantly getting tips of the fedora and compliments on my handle whenever I enter atheist chats. However, it's quite the opposite when I get comments from Christians, though. If you couldn't tell from the opening montage, C.S. Lewis is a pretty popular guy. In fact, I'd venture to say that C.S. Lewis is the most popular Christian who's ever put pen to paper outside of the Bible. So perhaps you can imagine the vitriol I get from Christians for mocking their modern-day 13th apostle. But after filtering through all the weeping and gnashing of teeth in the comments, one question kept popping up. And honestly, it's a fair question.
B.S. Lewis. What's your problem with C.S. Lewis?
Seeing how my channel is a few years old at this point, and I don't even have one video on CS, it just makes sense that I make a video to address that steaming pile of crap. So without further ado, here are the top 5 reasons why CS is BS. The problem of animal suffering is a subcategory of the larger overarching problem of evil that has been a thorn in the side of Christianity since its inception. It's mainly a problem for Christian apologists because it completely sidesteps their free will defense when it comes to human suffering. If Jesus is seen as noble for willingly submitting himself to the suffering of the cross for the sins of man, then the animal who is unwillingly subject to the pain inherent in this world via the food chain is indeed dealt an unfair hand by the Creator. Except for perhaps the snakes. We all know those bastards had it coming. No amount of soul-building or greater good theodicies seem to address this specific issue, and the responses from Christians to this ethical conundrum range from pathetic to absurd. Now, being the trend-setting apologist that C.S. Lewis is, his answer to the problem of animal suffering is especially pathetically absurd. He just denies that animals feel pain at all. Here's a quote from Chapter 9 in his book, The Problem of Pain.
The Christian explanation of human pain cannot be extended to animal pain. So far as we know, beasts are incapable either of sin or virtue. Therefore they can neither deserve pain or be improved by it. But at least a great deal of what appears to be animal suffering need not be suffering in any real sense. It may be we who have invented the sufferers by the pathetic fallacy of reading into the beasts a self for which there is no real evidence.
Let's just think about the implications if you accept that theological turd into your worldview for a moment. For one, the ethical treatment of animals disappears. CS has no grounds to protest brutal factory farming practices, the plot of Guardians of the Galaxy 3, or even my friend Deconverted Man kicking puppies. He's just painlessly relocating them from one spot to another with his boot. The second thing is science denial. CS was born in 1898. The medical investigations into pain receptors began in 1906. Which means he was alive during the very period of time when the medical and scientific discoveries were being made that debunked his proposed theodicy. Lastly is the psychological price that has to be paid to adopt this view. It degrades all non-human life to NPC status. I'd imagine it even causes a slight detachment from reality. If you can't trust your observations about the pain your family dog is in, then how can you expect to trust them about the joy or the love? It just seems to me that this view would erode any empathy that you have towards any non-human living thing. Ironically enough, though, Lewis's journey from atheism to Christianity began with one such empathetic animal encounter. On one occasion, Lewis recalled his time as a soldier in World War I. He reminisced on being trapped in a foxhole with a mouse while being bombarded by enemy fire. As he observed that the mouse made no attempts to flee from him, he wrote this.
That day I realized how a greater terror overcomes a lesser terror.
Now, I like to imagine what C.S. Lewis, circa the Problem of Pain era, would have told that mouse. And I imagine it'd probably sound something like this.
Don't be a fraidy cat mouse. No one can hurt you.
C.S. Lewis's most popular apologetic argument is possibly the liar, lunatic, or Lord trilemma he lays out in Mere Christianity. Here's a short I made a while back of Christopher Hitchens' hilarious take on the trilemma.
I take so few occasions to praise C.S. Lewis, and he says, now unless the speaker who offers that is God, this is really so preposterous as to be comic. We can all understand how a man forgives offenses against himself. You tread on my toes, I forgive you. But what should we make of a man, himself untrodden upon, who announced that he forgave you for treading on other men's toes? Asinine fatuity is the kindest description we should give of his conduct. This is Lewis. Yet this is what Jesus did. He unhesitatingly behaved as if he was the party chiefly concerned. In the mouth of any speaker who is not God, these words would imply what I can only regard as a silliness and conceit, unrivaled by any other character in history. A man who was merely a man and said the sorts of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, or else he would be the devil of hell. And Lewis, who's argued so well up till then, can't complete a syllogism.
To his credit, C.S. had little tolerance for those who say Jesus was just a good or wise moral teacher. And Lewis is one of the few Christians I've ever heard that could even entertain the possibility of Jesus being the devil of hell. But to my knowledge, he doesn't have one writing where he even attempts to fully explore that possibility. He just concludes that it's obvious that Jesus is God and moves on. For such an acclaimed author of fiction, this really demonstrates an astonishing lack of imagination. The liar, lunatic, Lord argument has often been criticized for being a false trilemma, so I won't spend much time on this low-hanging fruit. But here are just a few more options, beginning with L, for you to consider. Legend. Jesus was indeed a historical figure, but his life was embellished by others. Loki. As C.S. alluded to, Jesus was an incarnated malevolent spirit or trickster god, not the benevolent protagonist. Lewis. In a Twilight Zone-style shakeup, the story of Jesus is actually a metaphorical tale of C.S. Lewis himself that he wrote to himself because solipsism is true. Hey, you never know. That seems just about as likely to me as Jesus being God. You have to understand that the trilemma is really just Lewis's expansion on a rhetorical running gag that plays throughout the Gospels. Namely, just Jesus going around asking everyone he meets, "Who do you say I am?"
And I am whatever you say I am. If I wasn't, then why would I say I am? In the paper, the news, every day I am.
Yo, Marshall, this is Black Jesus. Could you stop stealing from my worldview to make yourself rich? Thanks, my cracker. But what really blisters my bumness about the trilemma is this. It is extremely manipulative sophistry that attempts to make a mundane and fairly common process that you employ frequently throughout your day-to-day life seem highly profound and exclusive to Jesus. To illustrate this, let's substitute liar for deliberately false, lunatic for unintentionally false, and Lord for true. You'll quickly realize that CS is just describing the process you go through when anyone makes a claim to you, no matter how boring or extraordinary it is. Your mom tells you breakfast is ready. Well, she's either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord of the Pancakes. Joseph Smith was instructed by Jesus to reform the Christian church. Well, that could only mean that he was either a liar, a lunatic, or entitled to marry as many women as he wanted because he was the new mouthpiece of God. Some ancient prophet was promised a small piece of land in the Middle East by the creator of the universe. You guessed it, he was either a liar, a lunatic, or you can watch current events on your news station to see how that one plays out. I hope you can see how pathetically unimpressive this line of reasoning is, and despite poetically describing the process of decision-making, it does very little for helping the reader critically examine propositions put forward by others. Unless, of course, we are to follow C.S.'s example, by claiming the more extraordinary a proposition is, the more obviously true it is. Another stubborn turd that just won't flush is C.S. Lewis's moral argument from Mere Christianity involving straight lines contrasting against crooked lines.
A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. It is a matter of understanding good by experiencing evil.
Many modern-day apologists are still rewarming this steaming pile of crap today. They're just changing the flavor of it slightly and serving it up to a new generation of wide-eyed, gullible suckers.
When I see a circle that looks like this, I know it's not a perfect circle, because I've seen a perfect circle before.
Let's just put aside the fact that in the last 2 points, C.S. Lewis can neither demonstrate through his observational prowess whether or not a dog is really in pain, or if Jesus is the epitome of a good God rather than the devil himself. He doesn't label which line is supposed to represent good or evil. To summarize his whole point is to say that different things are different. If anything, this illustration should reinforce the supremacy of subjective morality over objective as it illuminates the situational nature of which line is quote-unquote good. When walking a tightrope, for example, a crooked line would not be ideal for preserving your well-being. Whereas if you find yourself barreling towards a brick wall, a crooked line would be just what you needed to prevent certain calamity. The religious often ignore this situational aspect of morality in favor of an absolute moral standard that is informed by their traditional dogmas on karma, cosmic justice, or a judgment day. They count the hits and ignore the misses. When two people agree that a heinous act like murder is wrong, they count it as evidence towards objective morality. But when two people disagree about the heinousness of an act like, say, eating animals, they reject it as any sort of evidence of a subjective moral framework. But let's consider a different analogy involving lines, instead of the one that depends on Lewis's questionable intuition. In the 1950s, a psychologist named Solomon Asch directed a series of studies designed to explore social conformity. Groups of 8 students were shown a picture of 3 lines of obviously different lengths, then shown one line and asked to identify which of the 3 it was identical to. The catch was that 7 of the 8 students were paid actors. They were told to give the correct answer for a few rounds to establish trust with the test subject, and then switch answers to an obviously incorrect one to see how many test subjects would deny their own observation and intuition to conform to the group. It was found that 74% of all participants gave at least one wrong answer. 74%. That's 3 out of every 4 people. So don't sit there and tell me that society has zero impact on how you shape your moral outlook. When asked about these results, Dr. Asch stated, that intelligent, well-meaning young people are willing to call white black is a matter of concern. So if you're a religious person who has a gay couple as friends, and someone in your faith community brings to your attention that there are straight lines and gay lines, despite your own observation that your friends really seem to love each other and aren't causing anyone harm in their relationship, you might want to consider the Ash experiments, and determine whether your moral inclinations are being gaslit by your community, or you just want to be your own god by making moral judgments for yourself. This little gem is another quote from Lewis's book, The Problem of Pain. Although most of the theological context to support this is from his book, The Great Divorce.
I willingly believe that the damned are, in one sense, successful rebels to the end, that the doors of hell are locked on the inside.
It's often used in conjunction with the "you send yourself to hell" trope popularized by Billy Graham.
He is saying that God will never send anybody to hell. If man goes to hell, he goes by his own free choice.
Not only does this talking point annoy me as an atheist, it triggered me as a former fundamentalist. Why, you ask? It suggests that if it is by your will you are damned, then it's also by your will that you are saved, which was antithetical to my flavor of Christianity. It also suggests that your fate is not sealed on Judgment Day, that you can just have an epiphany in hell one day and say, "Hey, I think I'd like to go to heaven now," which makes evangelism, and in fact all the Christian experience on earth, quite vapid and pointless. But the main reason is, there is zero biblical support for this at all. It's just CS making up doctrines. Proponents of Lewis will often come to his defense with verses such as, "A man shall reap what he sows," to emphasize personal responsibility. I usually point them to the parable of the talents in Matthew chapter 25, which says this.
His master replied, "You wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them."
So here we have Jesus explaining that God himself harvests where he has not sown, and gives the bag of gold a man literally sowed into the ground to another man who had an overabundance of gold. This parable quite literally illustrates that no man is guaranteed to reap what they sow, and that God can come along whenever he pleases and take the fruits of your labor and give it to another. But quite possibly the most damning verse against the idea of you sending yourself to hell, or that hell is locked from the inside, is Matthew chapter 10, verse 28.
Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell.
Who exactly is the one I should be afraid of burning my body and soul in hell? Myself? Why is the one capitalized? Is this Jesus' subtle admission that the Lewis option in the Legend Loki-Lewis trilemma is true? Am I in fact God? Or is this a semantic sleight of hand that attempts to preserve Lewis's God's benevolence while sacrificing his sovereignty? Possibly the most preposterous aspect of this whole garbage metaphor is also the most painfully obvious, though. If hell is locked from the inside, how would anyone ever get in there in the first place? So let's round out our list with a pearl of great price that really illuminates C.S. Lewis's critical thinking skills. Christianity is the one true myth.
Now the story of Christ is simply a true myth, a myth working on us in the same way as the others, but with the tremendous difference that it really happened, and one must be content to accept it in the same way, remembering that it is God's myth where the others are men's myths.
The real credit for this one actually goes to the Lord of the Rings author J.R.R. Tolkien. He and Lewis were friends who belonged to a group of authors known as the Inklings, who'd meet to discuss literature and projects they were working on. Lewis was in his 30s at the time and still an atheist. He had a passion for reading the ancient myths of Greek and Roman cultures and dissecting their tropes for deeper metaphorical beauty. This is where Tolkien stepped in and explained that the story of Jesus also contained the symbolical tropes found in pagan mythologies, but with the difference being that this particular myth had a grounding in historical fact.
Oh, this is amazing!
And that's all she wrote for C.S. Lewis's atheism, as he credits this revelation for being the catalyst that converted him to Christianity. Usually Christians fight tooth and nail to deny the parallels between the Gospels and what they refer to as quote-unquote pagan myths. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Mike Jones. Trying to minimize any similarities between, for example, the holiday of Easter and the Anglo-Saxon goddess Eoster, the holiday of Christmas and the Roman celebration of Saturnalia, the resurrection of Jesus and the multitude of dying and rising gods that came before him, and many more. But Lewis and Tolkien decided to try a different strategy and lean into those similarities. It appears they were far from first, however, as it seems that this accusation of plagiarism had been levied against the church since nearly its inception. 2nd century church father Justin Martyr had this to say in response to his critics.
When we say that the Word, who is the first birth of God, was produced without sexual union, and that He, Jesus Christ, our teacher, was crucified and died and rose again and ascended into heaven, we propound nothing different from what you believe regarding those whom you esteem sons of Jupiter. For when they say that Dionysus arose again and ascended to heaven, is it not evidence the devil has imitated the prophecy?
So as you can see, here we have Justin conceding the connection to the pagan myths. And the apologetic is akin to a young earth creationist explaining the existence of dinosaur fossils. Essentially, the devil inspired the pagans to test your faith. Unfortunately, C.S. Lewis's explanation isn't any more intellectually stimulating. Instead of Satan, he credits the Holy Spirit for inspiring previous pagan poets and prophets, that's a lot of P's, to tell their tales as signposts or indicators of the one true myth to come. So let's summarize this point. Any similarities in mythical storytelling before Jesus were either God or the devil made me do it, and anything after Jesus was quite obviously a copycat. I really can't think of anything more convenient.
Jesus, man.
Despite what you may be thinking at this point, I don't hate C.S. Lewis. I, like many others, appreciate his skill when he puts pen to paper. I quite like his works of fiction, and undoubtedly his study of the great classical myths helped hone his style as he is able to work on many levels and invoke emotion from his audience. Which is what made him such an effective, and in my opinion, dangerous sophist for Jesus Christ. Good storytelling is all about immersion and suspension of disbelief, which is all good when you're curled up in your study on a rainy day with your favorite novel. But it's an entirely different thing when one mistakes the metaphysics and ethics of their favorite fantasy for our objective shared reality. C.S. Lewis worked hard to blur those lines. As I've shown in this video, he wasn't a great apologist because of his commanding grasp of historical facts and figures, nor his superior scientific intellect. It was because he was a superb emotional manipulator. And for that fact, he is loved by many, even today.